It is allergy season, so I'm probably going to be coughing and smacking my lips because saliva frequently throughout this video. Please ignore it as best as you can. I can't help it. Anyways, let's get to this story. Breaking news. World locust populations have nearly sextupled in the past 2 weeks and is expected to rise further. Jennifer Benefici, a digital artist and vampires, started working right away at the sound of this. Seemingly for no reason, Jennifer's desk lamp started to flicker violently, but Jennifer simply turned it away from her as if she'd gone through this 100 times. Just as she took her hand off, the bulb shattered and out came a small ghost with rosy cheeks, orange swept hair, and a red turtleneck. That was the 4th one this week, said Jennifer to the ghost. The ghost did not pay attention, however, and started to rummage through the drawers, throwing the plastic silverware that Jennifer had to get specifically for the ghost, as not to disturb the neighbors. "Can you at least tell me your name?" exclaimed Jennifer. "It's the Maker," said the ghost. Jennifer, looking quite annoyed, stated, "That's not a name, that's a title." Is your name something like Mike or Kyle or Dylan? The two looked at each other, both confused but for different reasons. "How about I just call you Ty, since Tim doesn't fit you?" Jennifer suggested with a slight sigh in her voice. The Maker nodded with great exaggeration. With that, Jennifer went back to work, tired as ever, and the Maker continued to rummage through the kitchen. Jennifer woke up and was surprised to see that her apartment wasn't completely trashed as what she was used to. The silverware may have still been on the floor, however, the glass from the broken light bulb was gone. "Ty, are you there?" asked Jennifer in a somewhat worried tone. The refrigerator began to wobble and slightly muffled crunching could be heard coming from it. Jennifer let out a sigh of relief and annoyance and went to the fridge to let the Maker out. When Jennifer opened the refrigerator, she saw the Maker eating ice cubes of all things, including the molds themselves, which the Maker was having difficulty trying to fit in his mouth. "Don't eat the ice trays!" exclaimed Jennifer. "And why are you eating ice in the first place?" The Maker stared at Jennifer with a shadowy void in place of eyes and simply said, "I was cold." Jennifer stood there in confusion and disappointment, then turned around. "I'm just going to go get some new light bulbs, then. Don't make too much noise unless you want to be brought to one of the graveyards, alright?" "What is a graveyard?" the Maker asked. Jennifer stopped in everything they were doing and stood there, completely silent for a good moment. Jennifer, in a tone more worried and anxious than ever before, It's the place where ghosts are kept from others. If you were to go there, you wouldn't be able to see me." The Maker's rosy cheeks faded, and he receded further into the refrigerator. "I won't be noisy then." Jennifer finished getting dressed, put on her sunscreen, and walked out the door, looking back with slight regret in her eye, wishing that she hadn't mentioned the graveyards. Jennifer locked the door behind her and headed towards the elevator. After reaching the lobby of the complex, Jennifer ran into Mr. Peters, who lived 3 doors to the left. "You don't normally come out this early, Jenny. What's the occasion?" asked Mr. Peters. "Just going to stock up on food and get some light bulbs," Jennifer replied, not wanting to lie. Jennifer started to walk faster in order to imply that she didn't have time to talk. Mr. Peters asked if he could go along with her, and Jennifer replied with a hasty, "No." Jennifer had heard that Mr. Peters had once been a cop in Fogrest, and had supposedly dealt with a paranormal being that appeared about 4 years prior to when he first moved to Coyridge. Jennifer was afraid that if she were to hang out near Mr. Peters, that he might just ask the right questions to reveal that she'd been housing a poltergeist in her apartment. Jennifer hurried along down the painted sidewalks and mural-covered buildings to the metro. She waited for the train heading towards the Anchor District to arrive, which took longer than expected. Meanwhile, back in the apartment, the maker was dangling upside down from the desk lamp's socket, dreaming. Dreaming of horrible things, terrifying things. Dreaming of things such as losing everything you knew, a strange figure with mouth for eyes, and this dark slime coming from the void where his eyes should be, and ensnaring him, suffocating him, destroying what little life essence was within him. And then he woke up. The apartment was empty, and the lights were off. The maker wanted to cry out in fear, but he couldn't because he was afraid that he'd be taken away from Jennifer, who was the one thing that made him happy. The maker hung from the lamp socket in silence, trembling for what felt like hours. After stepping off of the train, Jennifer went up the stairs into the blinding sunlight. Around Jennifer was tightly packed crowds, endless streams of cars and buses, and stores and cafes lined along the sidewalks. The sky was grayed and smelled of gas. Jennifer had to stand on top of the railing to get a good view above the crowd. She surveyed the area looking for a grocery store to no avail. Jennifer stepped down and was soon swept away by the crowd and left to its mercy. Jennifer tried to get stable footing, and after a few minutes she finally did it. She ended up next to one of the cafes called Breakfast Bin. She felt as if her face was burning, which was when she realized that her sunscreen had worn off. She hurried inside since there was no shade nearby and reapplied her sunscreen. "Can I help you?" asked the cashier. "Where is the nearest grocery store?" Jennifer said in a trembling voice, clearly on the verge of a breakdown. "Go about 2 minutes down from here and then a left at the pharmacy, and it should be a 5-minute walk from there," the cashier said in a cheery voice. Jennifer thanked them and headed out. Even though Jennifer had been living in Coleridge for about 10 years now, she was never able to get using time and place of distance. Jennifer made sure to stay on the edge of the crowd as not to get swept up again. And soon enough, she saw the pharmacy. The crosswalk was just a few feet away, but because of the crowd, it seemed impossible to reach. She took a deep and long breath and headed forward, pushing against the crowd. She was almost there, but she could feel her feet leaving the ground again. And she reached out in desperation, and in her surprise, someone took her by the hand and pulled her out. It was a tall, thin man wearing a duffel coat and paperboy cap. "Are you a tourist?" asked the man. Jennifer, after catching her breath, replied, "I'm from the Pearl District. This is my first time going downtown early in the day." The crosswalk light turned green, and the two of them, along with the countless others, made their way across the street. At the other side of the crossing, the man started talking. "My name's Oscar Murphy. What is your name, my lady?" Jennifer wasn't expecting a formal introduction, but introduced herself anyways, not wanting to be rude. "My name is Jennifer Benefici." Oscar's eyes lit up with excitement. "Are you the tourist that draws the breaking stories on the news? I've always found it interesting how you manage to convert words and boring graphs into life-filled art." Jennifer was surprised and began to feel uncomfortable. She never expected that someone would actually like her art, even though it's her source of income. Jennifer began to stutter more than ever. I need to go now." Oscar gave a warm goodbye as Jennifer rushed down the sidewalk. After running for a good 2 minutes, Jennifer stopped and reapplied her sunscreen. She was about to continue when she noticed that she was already in front of the grocery store. She went inside and went to get light bulbs, various fruits and vegetables, and instant ramen. Lots of it. She checked out and asked where the closest metro was, and made her way down. The walk to the metro wasn't as bad as when she arrived. There were fewer cars and people, and most of the shops were selling outdoorsy stuff, such as bikes, helmets, and climbing gear. Jennifer figured that she must be near the Cultures District, which is where all the nature reserves and mountain trails were at. And the ride back home might take at least an hour, she figured. She located the entrance to the metro and went downstairs and saw that the subway to the Pearl District was getting ready to leave. She sprinted for the door and managed to get on just as the doors closed, without a single thing dropping out of the bags, surprisingly. It was getting dark by the time Jennifer got to her apartment. She opened the door with some difficulty, having 60 or so packages of ramen and such in her arms. When she entered, she saw the maker curled on the floor, trembling. Jennifer set the bags on the counter, forgetting to close the door, and kneeled in front of the maker, wrapping her arms around the ghost in an effort to comfort him. "Don't worry, Ty. I'm back. I know I was gone for a while. Some things happened that were out of my control that made me a little late, but that's all." The maker shook his head and said, "I wasn't afraid that you were gone because you left. I was afraid of what was in my dream. Everything was gone, and there was a person with mouth eyes and blank slime came out of mine." The ghost began to sob, and there was a knock on the open door and a man's voice along with it. "Sorry to intrude, Jenny, but your door was open, and I wanted to make sure that there wasn't any..." Jennifer whipped her head around to see Mr. Peters standing in the doorway, who was the last person she wanted to see the maker. "Leave like you saw nothing, Peters. He means no harm," Jennifer said with a commanding voice. "Very well, then. If you feel that this situation is under your control, I shall speak no word of it. If you need help, you know where to find me." With that, Mr. Peters left, closing the door behind him. This surprised Jennifer, who was still on edge. Both Jennifer and the maker stood there in silence. Jennifer walked to her bed and flopped down, screaming into her pillow. A few hours later, both the maker and Jennifer were asleep. Please I hope that you like this video. I worked hard on it. Like, subscribe, whatever. Comment. Probably no one's gonna see this. That's all.